Welcome back to this wonderful, amazing Roundtable Apologetics YouTube channel. Now, most of y'all have been waiting for this beautiful, wonderful segment of the channel, and this segment is labeled The Meaning of Life. I put up a poll recently, and a lot of people chose this as the first topic to be discussed.
Coronavirus! Coronavirus!
So there's a lot of topics that will be discussed in the course of this channel, and as the channel grows and it has a lot of people coming into it, we'll have a lot of people come through and collaborate with me as we build the content of this channel. We'll be discussing most of the topics that I either have discussed previously or those that I'll be discussing currently. Of course, most of this is in the introduction video, so if you haven't watched it, go there and watch it. And before you proceed, hit the notification bell. Of course, you know what that is because you've already hit a lot of notification bells. Hit the like button, most especially hit the subscribe button, and hopefully I can have your attention from the beginning to the end of this video. So we'll proceed with the content of the day, Roundtable Apologetics. So going right into the main purpose of this channel. So I did a little bit of reading. I did a little bit of listening to my favorite apologetic mentors, and I did a little bit of self-introspection in trying to come up with a particular points that would actually benefit you as you continue to watch the content of this channel. So when it comes to the question of meaning, a lot of people wonder, a lot of people ask the question, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? Even scientists have asked the question, why is there something rather than nothing? That's another version of asking the question of meaning of life. So I'm going to start with a few quotations that might be actually helpful to you or for you, or you can actually pick a few nuggets from them. So some of them that I scripted, and one of them was by Martin Luther King, and it says that I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. Unarmed truth and unconditional love. So when you have truth, right? When you have truth being the lead in the lead of whatever aspect or direction of life that you're pursuing, that in addition to unconditional love. And by unconditional love, you ought to step out of your comfort zone of love. You ought to step out of your segments of what you define love as and step out into this love that surpasses people's socioeconomic status, the love that surpasses people's gender identification, the love that surpasses people's ideologies and theories and whatever you disagree with, that love that sees beyond all theirs and judges them by the content of their character. So that's the kind of love that I think Martin Luther King is speaking about. And we have that unconditional love and unarmed truth. When those work together, those are the things that would have at the final say at the end of it all. So then you talk about the truth as the most powerful weapon in the world and love as the most powerful ethic. This is by Ravi Zacharias. And this quote, in addition to what Martin Luther King said, actually collaboratively then bring us to the main purpose, or should I say, the main understanding or the beginning of understanding what the meaning of life is. So now we already see that there is truth and love, truth being the ultimate pursuit and love being the ultimate ethic. So when you combine these two, then you're starting to derive some sense of meaning and purpose into your life. Because if your life is not driven by truth, if your love is not driven by the pursuit of unconditional love or the submission of unconditional love to the people that are around you, then there ought to be some re-examining to determine what else would determine the meaning of life. Of course, there is all the questions of what is objectively true and what's subjectively true. Is it subjective? Is it objective? Is it what? But those are some of the things that we'd actually look into as time goes on. But for now, just note that the pursuit of what is true and unconditional love ought to be at the core of what you would define as the meaning of life. So then when you go to, in the light of apologetics, right, in the light of trying to unravel or uncover, or should I say, give responses to questions, old age questions that people have been trying to search answers for, it is very critical, it is very crucial that as you give a truthful response to somebody, because it ought to be truthful in the first place. So you also ought to be understanding of the fact that this truth has to correlate to someone's reality. So let me give you a storyline. So let's assume that, let's say I hurt my toe, or I'm in pain, or I'm suffering in some particular way, and then you come to tell me, oh no, in the vastness of the universe, in the vastness of reality, that particular pain is insignificant. That is, it could be true, but it's not in correspondence to the reality that I'm experiencing right now. Because at that particular moment, I'm looking for someone to stand with me through the suffering, for someone to support me through the suffering, for someone to help me through this kind of suffering that I'm experiencing right now. So if you're then giving me a philosophical perspective of view of what I'm going through, that might not necessarily correspond to the reality that I'm experiencing right now. And that's why, in as much as we ought to give truthful responses to the people that ask the questions, we also ought to be considerate of the experience that they find themselves in. And after being considerate of that experience, then we can proceed to relate to it and give them a relatable, but a truthful but relatable response. So in that particular regard, in the example that I gave you, it will be much more convenient for you to relate to my pain, to relate to the suffering that I'm going through, and give me a response that will be much more considerate of the situation that I find myself in, but also truthful in the sense that I won't be captured in a bubble of lies, thinking that this is all going to go away in that particular regard. So now that's where we then come to understand behind every particular question, behind every question about the meaning of life, about truth being objective or subjective, or about any particular thing that you're in pursuit of, there is someone asking the question. There is an experience behind the question. So we ought to then be considerate of that experience if we're to give a response. Okay, so that's amazing. So now would proceed to the what we were talking about. In the due course of this segment, I just want to tell you a beautiful story that I came across from this videos that I was watching and topics that I was trying to dig into, right? So I'll just tell the story about it. And then it goes as follows. So it's probably one that you probably heard before, but if you haven't, just sit down and enjoy. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson went on a camping trip together, and after a very beautiful meal and a bottle of wine, they lay down for the night and went to sleep. A few hours later, Holmes awoke and, quite startled, nudged his friend awake. He said, Watson, Watson, look up at the sky and tell me, what exactly do you see? Watson looked up and replied, You see, I see millions and millions of stars. Holmes was like, So what does that mean? What does that tell you? Watson replies, Astronomically, it tells me there are billions of stars and potentially millions of planets. Astrologically, I observe that Saturn is in Leo. Aerologically, I observe that the time is 3:30. Theologically, I can say that God is all powerful and that we are all small and insignificant. Meteorologically, I can tell that it's going to be a very beautiful day. Why, Holmes? What does it tell you? Holmes was silent for a moment and then spoke. Watson, you idiot. Someone has stolen our tent.
Astonishing.
What is the purpose of the story? The purpose of the story is to show us that sometimes there is a place for common sense. There is a place for some logical responses to answers. There is a place for when we ought to when someone asks the question of meaning, and we ought to then go back to that place of relatability, that place of understanding the person's reasons behind the question. And that's where then we can give a much more satisfactory response to what the meaning of life is. So now that's something that we also ought to understand, that in most cases we are engulfed in these aspects of rational, logical, theoretical attributes to the meaning of life, that we forget the very minimal things, the experience of life. How are you experiencing life? How are you satisfying yourself? How are you benefiting from that life that you're living? And how are you then contributing to the entirety of the world as a whole? So how then do you derive meaning? Is it from a destructive patterns, or is it from beneficial patterns? And are these patterns selfishly beneficial, or are they holistically beneficial? They're like four things that we can look into when we are assessing this question of meaning, right? Um, there is the question of wonder, or should I say, there's the aspect of wonder. Toddlers are very inquisitive. They want to touch this, they want to do this, they want to play with this, they want to do that, they want to jump on this, they want to touch on this, they really are in the process of exploring and understanding the world around them. There is a sense of wonder. They're asking, but what does it mean? Baba, mama. I feel like I wish we could get into the minds of toddlers. There is this movie that I was watching called Super Babies. It literally tries to get into the minds of babies. It makes me wonder what exactly goes into their mind. Even at this old age, there is still that sense of wonder. We're trying to ask, where did we come from? What does this all mean? Where is this beauty actually coming from? What do we do with all of this? It's so amazing. It's so beautiful. The vastness of the universe, the intrinsic nature of life, the complexity yet beauty in all of the things around us. There is that sense of wonder. And then when we lose that sense of wonder, we lose that sense of gratitude. And with the loss of gratitude comes the loss of value for anything around us. And when you lose the value in and with everything around you, then seems to be something purposeless about the life that you would be living at that particular point in time. The second is the truth that we've already spoken about, right? The third is love. And the fourth is some form of security. Most of us are looking for some sense of security. It could be financial security, it could be social security, it could be romantic security, which ties into the love aspect of things. We're looking for some sense of security. We want to belong somewhere, we want to be a part of something impactful, we want to push something ahead into our lives, and we want to pursue things that are going to bring an impact. So we're looking for some sense of security, and maybe that's where some of us draw the meaning. But where is your sense of security? Is it founded on a firm foundation, or is it put on a temporary foundation? Those are the four aspects. So there is the aspect of truth, there is the aspect of love, there is the aspect of security, and there is the aspect of wonder that never ceases to be. When all of these things work collaboratively, they give us a sense of meaning in life. They give us a sense of meaning in life. So then I'll give you another perspective of meaning from Dr. William Lane Craig. Of course, some of you could have potentially heard about him, and if you haven't heard about him yet, just do yourself a favor, check out his content. Very beautiful philosopher. He's a Christian philosopher, and he's also a theologian. William Craig argues that the question of meaning to life also aligns with the question of, does God exist? And hold up, we're going to get there. You might ask, you might be wondering, but how did we jump from the meaning of life to God existing? The argument is on the basis that if God does not exist, then there is no meaning to life. Life is meaningless. So all the aspects of meaning that we've spoken about previously, if philosophically speaking, now this is where we get to the philosophical aspect of meaning. Philosophically speaking, if God does not exist, there is no meaning to life, right? And why is that the case? Because without God, then everything is bound to the same destiny, and that's death and destruction. So without God, everything that you do is meaningless, in the sense that if you're looking towards curbing climate change, or creating a chance for us to live longer as a human species, if everything is going to end up in destruction either way, as science tells us, everything ceases to exist. So now, if we're moving to a world of disorderliness, a world of meaninglessness, then whatever we're doing right now is of no meaning. This is where now we go beyond the world with us. This is where we have to look beyond the materialistic world and then search for the meaning of the actions that we're doing now for something that's going to be beyond the materialistic world. So if you're helping someone and if you're contributing positively to their life, if at the end of the day, in some years to come, it's not going to mean anything, or it's not going to amount to anything, then what is the point of it anyways? What is the point? And if there's no direction to what we're doing, then it seems as though we're just random creatures doing random things that are without meaning if God didn't exist. So now the outcome is life is without ultimate value, purpose, and significance. Purpose speaks to the goals that we're trying to achieve. If there is no purpose to that which we're trying to do, if there is no goal, if there's no output, if there's no outcome to that which you're trying to achieve, then what's the point of doing it in the first place? there is no meaning to it. If there is no value, and by value we mean moral value, because as species, we are moral species. We are moral species with a certain level of moral compass. You might be a believer or not, but at the end of the day, there are certain things that you ultimately believe to be morally wrong, and there are certain things that you not only ultimately but objectively believe to be wrong. So, of course, taking an innocent life is ultimately wrong because it comes with some moral prerogatives that align with that particular statement. But without value, there is no moral value. And without moral value, every single moral thing that you do is rather meaningless. I can do whatever I want to do, and you can do whatever you want to do, and we can't even stand to judge one another. If I were racist and someone was misogynistic, you can't then stand to come against them. On what basis are you doing that when there is no moral value or where there's no value to that which they are doing? And then the third is the significance, the importance. Why does it matter? Why is it that that which you're doing matters, right? And without God, the ultimate absurdity of the outcome of this is that there is no purpose to whatever we're doing, or should I say, there is no objective meaning to that which you're doing. There's no objective purpose. There is no value to that which all those moral actions. There is no significance to that which we are doing. You might as well disagree that all these three things can actually be um, obtained without the necessity of God. But the question is, on what basis do you then determine what value is? Is it on the basis of your own prerogative, or is it on the basis of a certain group of people's prerogative, or is it on the basis of that which is beyond you? Our argument is we ought to look at the perfection, the perfect being, to determine that the prerogative. Our basis is the ultimate perfect being. If your basis is a certain group of people or your own self, then on what basis do you deduce that? And why is yours irrelevant over another person? Why should you then determine that what you're doing is right and what another person is doing is wrong? So that's on the aspect of moral value. On the aspect of purpose, you can achieve happiness if happiness were the end goal. What stops the person that is a suicide bomber or a mass shooter from obtaining happiness from whatever they're doing? And what then makes that wrong if they're all in pursuit of the same thing that you're in pursuing? And when it comes to moral significance, if everything is going to come to destruction at the end of the day, where therein lies the significance of that which that you're doing? So these are the things you can bounce off on top of your head as you examine the meaning of life and value and whatnot. So without ultimate values, so without God, moral values are mere outcomes of social biological standards as opposed to a transcendent being calling them so. And without the point of reference, which is God, ethics and a deeper meaning are simply absurd. We are simply machines propagated by DNA to do the things that we do. So if we are simply machines that are doing whatever we are propagated to do, what then gives us the right to determine that what the other person is doing is wrong? Because if we, at the end of the day, we're all just doing what we're programmed to do, then the people that do things that we presume to be wrong are simply following what their nature tells them to, are simply following what DNA propagates them. And even our judgment of their actions is simply propagating what the DNA tells us to. So everything is just meaningless and purposeless. If we are just saying that something is good, there ought to be a measure of good. There ought to be a point of reference to which we determine, based on this point of reference, that is good. If we do not have a point of reference, which is the ultimate point of reference, then on what are we basing that idea of moral value or moral good and whatnot? So, and what is then the horror of mankind when we then we don't consider the existence of God to the question of meaning? Is that because man ends in nothing and despair, man is also nothing. If God is dead, the man is also dead. So if there is no if God does not exist, then there is no meaning to anything, and if there's no meaning to anything, then man is meaningless. But because we find ourselves in a world where we look for meaning, where we identify meaning, where we question the meaning, I think C.S. Lewis says something that if there was no purpose or meaning to life, then we wouldn't have found it in the first place. But because we're trying to find a sense of purpose, because we're in pursuit of a sense of purpose, and even some of us have found some level of a sense of purpose, they ought to be one. And as I conclude, I'll just conclude with the Eufro Dilemma, which is normally brought up from the atheistic perspective. the Eufro Dilemma speaks specifically to goodness, right? So it says, it asks the question, does God call something good because it is good? Or is it good because God calls it good? Now, there is the analysis in the question. If God calls something good because it already is good, then there is a sense, there is some form of goodness, or should I say, goodness is mutually exclusive from God. And that goodness then surpasses God in a way because it dictates what God ought to call something. There is some sense of nature of goodness that is outside of God that God has to make reference to call something good. But if God calls something good, I mean, if something is good only when God calls it good, then it brings us to the problem of anything arbitrary can be called good in the eyes of God. Then it brings us the problem. So God can wake up one day and say murder is good, and then it shall be good. And that is also logically problematic. But the response to this Eufro dilemma that most people tend to miss is that God doesn't call things good because they're good, and it doesn't, and things aren't good because God calls them good. But things God calls good because they align with His nature. God's nature being good, God being the epitome of good, then looks at things that are in alignment with His nature, and they are then referred to as good. So things obtain their goodness from in alignment to the nature of who God is. So when you come across the Eufro dilemma, just tell somebody, anything good is because it's good because it aligns with God's nature. The question of meaning also tends to bring all of this. So if now God exists and there is meaning to life, or should I say then there's meaning, why does evil exist? Why does He allow bad things to happen? Right? That's something that we'll be discussing very, 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 very soon. The question of evil and good, the question of why does God let bad things happen. In conclusion, I'll say for something to be significant, it ought to create some level of impact. It ought to make a difference. And from the atheistic perspective, everything is ultimately insignificant because everything is without purpose, value, and significance. Thank you for coming through. Thank you for coming this far. I know this was quite a long video, but I believe that it gave you some nuggets to go on with. If you have any questions that you have, put them in the comment section below. If you need elaboration on something, I normally would love to give much more feedback on my video in the sense that if there is something that needs clarity, I can give a video, one video to it, get much more deeper into it and try to elaborate on it. Then if someone has questions, any particular questions that they want me to address with regards to the video that I'm making right now, they can put it in the comment section, then I can elaborate on it. So I'm glad that you made it this far, and I hope to see you in my next video. So yeah, Roundtable Apologetics, here for good.